I never thought the day would come when I would have to choose between my only son and my sanity. But there I was, standing in my own living room, watching my daughter-in-law pack my clothes into garbage bags like I was the intruder. The audacity in her eyes made my blood boil. I laughed right in her face and told her this house belonged to me, that she needed to take her husband and leave immediately. The rage that flashed across her face was terrifying. But what happened next changed everything forever. My name is Margaret Torres. I am 69 years old, and I learned very early in life that survival requires sacrifice. I was barely 24 when I became a widow. My husband Daniel died in a construction accident, leaving me alone with our baby boy Marcus, who was just learning to walk. There was no insurance money, no family to help, no safety net of any kind. It was just the two of us against an unforgiving world. I took whatever work I could find at first. I cleaned houses, worked night shifts at a laundry facility, babysat other people's children while my own son slept in a makeshift crib beside me. The exhaustion was crushing. Some nights I would collapse into bed and cry silently, wondering how I would make it through another day. But Marcus needed me, and that was enough to keep me going. What saved us was my ability to sew. My grandmother had taught me when I was just a girl, and I had always loved creating beautiful things with my hands. I started taking orders from neighbors, charging almost nothing at first just to build a reputation. Party dresses, hemmed pants, repaired jackets. My sewing machine became my lifeline, humming late into the night while Marcus slept peacefully in the next room. The years passed in a blur of exhaustion and determination. I left the laundry facility when my sewing business grew enough to support us. Word spread about my work, and soon I had more clients than I could handle. Wedding dresses became my specialty. Brides would come to my tiny apartment and leave with gowns that made them cry with joy. Every stitch I made was a promise to myself and to Marcus. Someday we would have our own home. Someday we would be secure. I saved every penny I possibly could for 18 years. I kept the money in an old cookie tin hidden beneath my bed, adding to it week after week, month after month. I never bought myself new clothes. I never went out to restaurants or movies. Every dollar went into that tin except for what Marcus absolutely needed for school and clothes. He was my world, my reason for breathing. I wanted him to have opportunities one never had. When Marcus turned 19 and got his first real job at an accounting firm, I was 43 years old and finally had enough money for a down payment on a house. It was not in the best neighborhood and it needed work, but it was mine. I will never forget the day I signed those papers. The real estate agent handed me the deed with my name printed on it, and I cried so hard I could barely see the words. Margaret Torres, homeowner. Those words meant I had survived. They meant every sacrifice had been worth it. The house had 3 bedrooms, a kitchen that needed updating, 1 bathroom with old fixtures, and a living room with large windows that let in beautiful morning light. The walls were painted a dingy beige color and the carpets were worn, but to me it was a palace. It represented security, stability, a future. No landlord could ever kick us out again. This was ours. I spent months fixing every corner of that house. I painted the walls a soft cream color, replaced the old carpets with affordable laminate flooring, hung curtains I sewed myself from fabric I got on sale. Marcus helped me every weekend, painting walls, fixing loose floorboards, installing new cabinet handles. We would sit on the floor eating takeout pizza, laughing and planning how we would decorate each room. Those were the happiest days of my life. I set up my sewing workspace in the smallest bedroom, positioning my machine near the window where natural light poured in. The smell of fresh paint mixed with the scent of new fabric filled the house. For the first time in decades, I allowed myself to dream beyond mere survival. Maybe I could expand my business. Maybe I could even hire an assistant. The possibilities felt endless. Marcus thrived during those years. He got promoted at work, started earning a good salary, became responsible and hardworking. I was so incredibly proud of the man he had become despite growing up without a father. He never complained about our struggles when he was young. He understood even then how hard I worked to give him a good life. I felt blessed beyond measure. Then Marcus met Nicole when he was 27 years old. She came to our house one Sunday afternoon holding his hand, wearing a bright red dress and high heels that clicked sharply against our floors. She was stunning with long blonde hair and a smile that showed perfect white teeth. Marcus was absolutely glowing with happiness. You could see the love in his eyes every time he looked at her. I made coffee and served the lemon cake I had baked that morning. Nicole ate delicately, dabbing her mouth with a napkin after each small bite. She talked about her job at a marketing agency, about her unfinished degree in communications, about her love of interior design. She complimented the house, though I noticed her eyes scanning every room with what seemed like assessment rather than appreciation. But I pushed those thoughts away. I wanted to believe she was good for Marcus, that she would make him happy. They dated for 8 months before Marcus announced they were getting engaged. Nicole was 3 months pregnant. My emotions were complicated. I was happy Marcus was starting his own family, but something deep in my gut warned me that trouble was coming. Still, I gave them my blessing and my full support. I paid for a large portion of their wedding and spent 6 weeks sewing Nicole's wedding dress by hand, an intricate design in ivory silk that fit her perfectly. The wedding was beautiful. Nicole looked radiant in the dress I had created with so much love and care. Marcus could not stop staring at her during the ceremony. I watched them exchange vows with tears streaming down my face, thinking maybe my worries had been foolish. Maybe Nicole would be a wonderful wife and mother. Maybe I had been wrong to doubt her. But then everything changed 5 days after the wedding. Marcus and Nicole showed up at my door with suitcases and devastated expressions. Nicole had miscarried. She looked pale and broken, her eyes red and swollen. Marcus was barely holding himself together. They cried in my living room while I made tea and held them both, my heart breaking for their loss. That is when Marcus asked if they could stay with me temporarily. They had overspent on the wedding and medical bills, and they could no longer afford their apartment. He said they just needed a few months to save money and get back on their feet. He looked at me with those same pleading eyes he had as a little boy. How could I possibly say no? This was my son during the worst time of his life. Of course I said yes. I helped them move their things into the guest bedroom that afternoon. I washed sheets, provided fresh towels, cooked a special dinner to comfort them. Nicole barely touched her food but thanked me with a weak smile. I thought this arrangement would be temporary and manageable. I had no idea how completely wrong I was. The first week was relatively peaceful. Nicole stayed in the bedroom most of the time, recovering both physically and emotionally. I brought her meals, made herbal tea, tried to give her space to process her grief. Marcus went to work each day looking increasingly stressed about their mounting debts. I offered quiet support and a safe place for them to heal. But during the second week, things started shifting. Nicole began emerging from the bedroom more often, moving through the house with a different kind of energy. One morning I came home from grocery shopping to find her rearranging the living room furniture. My favorite chair had been pushed into a dark corner, and the coffee table moved awkwardly near the television. When I asked what she was doing, she said casually that the old arrangement blocked too much light and made everything feel cramped. Another day I returned from running errands to discover she had replaced the kitchen curtains. The white ones I had sewn were folded on a chair, and in their place hung dark brown ones she had purchased. She said they matched the cabinets better and looked more modern. I stared at my carefully made curtains sitting discarded and felt a knot form in my throat. But I said nothing because she was grieving and maybe needed to feel some control over her environment. Weeks became months. Every time I gently asked about their apartment search, Marcus said prices were too high or they had not saved enough for a deposit yet. They just needed a little more time. I nodded because I could not throw my son out onto the street. But Nicole no longer acted like a temporary guest. She acted like the house belonged to her. She started cooking without asking permission, using all my pots and pans and leaving them dirty in the sink for me to clean. When I cooked, she made comments about how the food was too salty or overcooked. She invited her friends over without telling me first, and I would come home to find my living room full of strangers drinking wine and laughing loudly. One of her friends actually asked if I was the cleaning lady. Nicole laughed but never corrected her. My sewing work, my livelihood, began bothering her. She complained the machine noise disturbed her even though I only worked during daytime hours. She said the fabric and thread scattered around made the house look messy and unprofessional. One afternoon I came home to find several of my client projects stuffed into boxes and shoved into the closet. When I protested, Nicole said she needed to create space and I could sew another time, that it was not that important. But the physical changes to my home were nothing compared to the words. Nicole began dropping comments that seemed innocent on the surface but carried poison underneath. She would say things like, at my age I should think about slowing down, that too much sewing would ruin my eyesight, that older women often need help because their memory fails and it becomes dangerous for them to live alone. The implication was clear. She was painting me as feeble and incapable in my own home. When my friend Susan came to visit, as she had done for years, Nicole made her feel unwelcome. She would sigh dramatically, slam doors, turn the television volume up loud. One day Susan and I were having tea in the kitchen when Nicole came in and said she needed to start dinner immediately, and could we please go somewhere else because the kitchen was too small for 3 people. Susan looked uncomfortable, and we finished our conversation standing awkwardly in the backyard. After that day, Susan visited less and less. Sundays had always been special to me. I would cook a big family meal and the house would smell wonderful. But Nicole started suggesting we just order takeout instead, saying I was too tired to cook and should save my energy. When I insisted on cooking anyway, she would take a few bites and leave most of her plate untouched. Marcus would eat more of her portion than mine, and I watched my food grow cold, rejected. 6 months passed, then 7, then 8. I felt like a stranger in the house I had worked 20 years to buy. Every corner had been altered to suit Nicole. My belongings kept disappearing into boxes or closets. My clients stopped calling because Nicole made it clear they were not welcome. My income dropped dramatically. I, who had always supported myself, was now struggling financially, while 2 people lived in my house contributing almost nothing to expenses. One night I accidentally overheard a phone conversation I was never meant to hear. I had gone to the bathroom and on my way back I passed the guest bedroom. The door was slightly open and Nicole's voice floated out. She was talking to someone, probably a friend, complaining about living with her mother-in-law. She called me a nosy old woman who did not know when to step aside. She said the house was small and outdated, but at least they were not paying rent. Then she said something that made my blood turn cold. She said she just had to hold on a little longer until I was not a problem anymore. I stood frozen in the hallway with my hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. What did she mean by not a problem anymore? The tone of her voice was calculating, almost menacing. I went back to my room and sat on my bed in the darkness, unable to sleep, my mind racing with terrible possibilities. The next morning I gathered my courage and asked Marcus to speak with me alone. I told him I needed to know when they planned to leave, that 8 months had passed and I needed my space back. Marcus looked genuinely surprised, as if moving out had never crossed his mind. He said they still did not have enough money saved, that things were difficult, and how could I even consider throwing them out? I explained I was not throwing them out, just asking for a timeline. He got angry. He accused me of being selfish and said family supports each other. Then he stormed out, slamming the door. Nicole must have found out about our conversation because dinner that night was unbearably tense. Nobody spoke. The silence was thick with hostility. When we finished eating, Marcus and Nicole went straight to their room and shut the door. I washed all the dishes alone, feeling like an unwelcome guest in my own home. The months continued passing. 9 months, 10 months, 11 months of living together. Nicole stopped even pretending to be polite. She stopped greeting me in the mornings. She changed the television channel without asking while I was watching something. She started receiving large packages that a delivery driver would leave at the door. New lamps, decorative mirrors, throw pillows, a coffee table. She was slowly erasing my presence and replacing it with her own aesthetic. One day I finally said something. I told her she needed to stop buying things for the house without consulting me first, That this was my home and I had the right to decide how it looked. Nicole stared at me like I had said something absurd. She laughed and said she was just trying to modernize the place, that everything looked so old and depressing, that if she had to live here she deserved to make it look decent. The way she said live here, as if it were permanent, sent chills down my spine. I tried talking to Marcus again. I begged him to understand my position, that I loved them both but needed my life back. He said I was being dramatic, that Nicole was just trying to help improve the house. When I reminded him this was my house with my name on the deed, he went silent for a moment. Then he said something that shattered my heart. He said technically yes, it was my house, but morally I had an obligation to share it with family. He asked when I had started valuing property over my own son. Could not speak. I just sat there trying to process that my own child, the boy I had sacrificed everything for, was now using my love against me. He was twisting my devotion to make me feel guilty for wanting basic respect in my own home. That night I pulled out the metal box I kept hidden under my bed. Inside was the deed to the house, the document proving this place was legally mine. I held it in my trembling hands and read my name over and over. Margaret Torres, homeowner. I remembered every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every aching muscle from working double shifts. This house was my entire life's work. Nobody had the right to make me feel guilty for defending it. But I was also a mother. The instinct to protect Marcus and put his needs first had guided my entire adult life. Maybe I just needed more patience. Maybe things would improve. I put the deed back in the box and tried to convince myself everything would work out fine. I had no idea how much worse things were about to get. A full year passed since they arrived. 12 months of my home slowly being taken over. My sewing business had nearly collapsed. Clients had found other seamstresses because Nicole made them feel so uncomfortable when they visited. My income was a fraction of what it used to be. I was dipping into my savings to pay for utilities and groceries while Marcus and Nicole contributed almost nothing. They always had excuses about unexpected expenses or promised to pay me back next month. That next month never came. One afternoon I was working on a dress for a wedding, one of my few remaining clients. It was detailed work with hand-sewn beading that required intense concentration. Nicole barged into my room without knocking and said she needed me to do a favor. She had a job interview and needed a skirt hemmed immediately. I told her I would be happy to do it in 2 days after I finished this dress. Nicole became angry. She said she needed it for tomorrow and could not believe I would not help my own daughter-in-law. I explained I had a paid commitment to finish first. Nicole huffed, grabbed the wedding dress from my hands, looked at it with contempt, and threw it onto the bed. Several beads I had spent hours attaching came loose. I asked her to leave my room immediately. She smiled coldly and walked out slowly, clearly enjoying my frustration. I had to work until 4 in the morning to repair the damage and finish on time. The final breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon. I returned from grocery shopping to find Nicole sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread out in front of her. She was using a calculator and writing numbers in a notebook. When I got closer, I saw they were utility bills for the house. Water, electricity, gas, internet. All in my name. I asked what she was doing. Nicole looked up calmly and said she had been reviewing household expenses and noticed I was paying for everything, which was not fair. For one brief moment I thought she was finally going to offer to contribute properly. But what she said next took my breath away. Nicole said she had calculated that the fair thing would be to split costs 3 ways, but since I used more hot water in the mornings and my sewing machine used electricity, I should pay 40% while she and Marcus would each pay 30%. I stood there completely speechless. I was in my own house, the house I bought and paid for, and my daughter-in-law was telling me how much I owed for utilities. I told her no, that this was ridiculous, that if anyone should be paying more it was them since they had been living here free for a year. Nicole slammed the notebook shut and looked at me with cold, narrowed eyes. She said I was selfish, that I did not understand what family meant. Then she said something chilling. She said they had done me a favor by moving in so I would not be alone in this big house, That at my age it is dangerous to live alone, that I could fall or get sick or die and nobody would even know for days. The way she said it was calculated and threatening. In that moment I understood the truth with perfect clarity. Nicole did not move in out of necessity. She moved in because she wanted my house. She saw an elderly woman alone with property and no family except a manipulable son. She decided I was easy prey. Every comment about my age, every mention of danger, every suggestion that I needed them, it had all been part of a plan to make me feel dependent when actually they were the ones depending on me. That night I took out the deed again and read every single word. The house was 100% in my name. Marcus had no legal claim to it whatsoever. I could ask them to leave whenever I wanted. But he was my son. My only child. The baby I had raised alone through poverty and hardship. How could I possibly throw him out? I decided to try one final honest conversation. I asked Marcus to meet me for breakfast at a cafe near his office without Nicole. When we sat down across from each other, I looked at my son and searched for any trace of the sweet boy he used to be. I told him gently but firmly that I needed them to leave, that I loved them both but could not continue living this way, that I needed my home and my peace back. Marcus did not let me finish. He stood up abruptly, threw his napkin onto his untouched plate, and said he could not believe how cruel I was being. He said Nicole was right about me, that I was a bitter old woman who preferred to be alone rather than surrounded by family. He said I would regret this when I was sick and elderly with nobody to care for me. Then he walked out of the cafe, leaving me sitting there with tears streaming down my face while other customers stared. I went home with a completely broken heart. I had lost my son. Nicole had poisoned him against me so thoroughly that he no longer saw me as his mother, but as an obstacle to his happiness. I locked myself in my room and cried for hours. I cried for all the wasted years of sacrifice, for the son I raised who now treated me like an enemy. But something shifted inside me that night. Between the tears and the heartbreak, something hardened in my chest. Cold, clear decision. I was not going to let them steal what was mine. Not after everything I had fought for to get it. I started preparing. I gathered all my important documents, the deed, payment receipts, utility bills proving the house was mine. I organized everything into a folder and put it somewhere safe. If this was going to get ugly, I needed to be ready. The next few days were strange and tense. Marcus and Nicole barely acknowledged my existence. They ate meals in their room, left early for work, came home late. I used the time to call former clients and try to rebuild some of my lost business. Susan visited and held me while I cried and told her everything. She said I had every right to reclaim my home and my life. Then something happened that changed everything. On a Tuesday afternoon I was in my room sewing when I heard Nicole on the phone speaking loudly in the living room. She was talking about money, about an investment opportunity. She mentioned a specific amount. $20,000. She said they would have access to that money very soon, that it was just a matter of time. My heart stopped. I had exactly $20,000 in savings. It was everything I had left after buying the house and maintaining it over the years. My safety net. My emergency fund. Marcus knew about that money because I had mentioned it years ago when I still trusted him completely. I left my room with my heart pounding and confronted Nicole directly. I asked what money she was talking about. She turned with that cold smile and told me not to worry about things that did not concern me. I said if she was talking about my savings then it absolutely concerned me. Nicole set down her coffee mug hard, spilling some on the counter. She said that money should be for the whole family, not hoarded by me. She said I was selfish for keeping resources that could help Marcus get ahead. She said the fair thing would be for me to give them that money to invest in their future because I had already lived my life while they had theirs ahead of them. I told her she was completely insane if she thought I would hand over my savings. That it was the result of decades of hard work and sacrifice and I had no obligation to share it with anyone. Nicole stepped very close to me, so close I could see the rage in her eyes. She told me that one way or another that money would be theirs, that I had nobody else, that when I died everything would go to Marcus anyway, so why not just give it now when it could make a real difference? The way she said when I died did not sound like a distant hypothetical event. Sounded like a threat. Like something she had been planning. I backed away terrified and locked myself in my room. My hands shook as I called my bank. I spoke to a representative and changed my account so that only I could make withdrawals or any transactions. At least my money was protected. But I did not feel safe. I barely slept that night. Every sound made me jump. I wondered if Nicole was actually capable of hurting me. If my own son would stand by and let something terrible happen. The Marcus I raised would never have allowed it. But that Marcus no longer existed. The next morning I woke up with dread in my stomach. Something bad was coming. I could feel it. I made coffee with shaking hands. When Marcus and Nicole emerged from their room, Marcus was holding papers. They sat at the kitchen table and called me over in a formal tone like we were having a business meeting. Marcus pushed the papers toward me. He said they had been thinking about the housing situation and had consulted with a lawyer. He said after living somewhere for a year, you can claim residency rights. He mentioned something called adverse possession and said there were legal ways for them to claim partial ownership of the property. I could not believe what I was hearing. My own son was threatening to take my house using legal loopholes. I asked if he was serious. He avoided my eyes. Nicole answered for him. She said they did not want things to get legal and ugly. That they preferred a civilized agreement. The fair thing would be for me to transfer the house into Marcus' name, and in exchange they would let me live here for the rest of my life. They would even give me my own room and not charge rent. Let me live in my own house without charging rent. As if they were doing me a favor. As if 20 years of backbreaking work meant nothing. As if all my sacrifices were invisible. Rage exploded in my chest. Rage so intense I felt like I might choke on it. I told them to go straight to hell. That this house was mine, that I had the deed in my name, and no cheap lawyer would help them steal it. That they had 3 days to pack everything and leave or I would call the police and have them forcibly removed. Marcus slammed his fist on the table making the coffee cups rattle. He shouted that I could not just kick them out, that he was my son, that he had rights. I shouted back that the only right he ever had was to be loved and raised by me, and he had destroyed that right every single day for the past year. That the house was mine alone, and if he wanted property so badly he should work and buy his own just like I did. Nicole jumped up, her face red with fury. She pointed her finger at me and said I would regret this, that I would end up alone and miserable just like I deserved. I told them I would rather be alone than surrounded by snakes. I told them to get out of my sight before I did something I would regret. They stormed into their bedroom and slammed the door so hard pictures shook on the walls. I sat at the table with my heart pounding so violently I thought I might have a heart attack. But I also felt powerful. I felt like I had finally found my voice again. That afternoon I went to see a real lawyer, not whatever fraud they had consulted. I explained the entire situation and showed him all my documents. The lawyer reviewed everything and told me the house was 100% legally mine, that they had absolutely no claim to it regardless of how long they had lived there, that I could ask them to leave at any time, and if they refused I could start formal eviction proceedings. I felt relieved but also devastated because even though I was legally right, emotionally I was shattered. This was my son and I had reached the point of needing lawyers and police threats just to reclaim my own home. When I returned home the house was eerily quiet. I thought maybe they had gone out, but then I heard voices coming from my bedroom. My bedroom. I ran down the hall and threw open the door. Nicole was kneeling beside my bed holding the metal box in her hands. My private box with all my important documents. She had forced the lock open and was rifling through the contents, reading papers with greedy eyes. Marcus was standing next to her like a lookout guard. When they saw me neither had the decency to look ashamed. I screamed asking what they were doing in my room touching my private things. Nicole held up the deed and waved it in the air mockingly. She said they were just verifying the documents were real, that they had a right to know what they were dealing with. I snatched the deed from her hand so forcefully it nearly tore. I told her she had no right to enter my room, touch my belongings, or go through my private papers. Marcus stepped forward and said to stop being dramatic, that they lived here and had a right to know their legal situation, that I was hiding information that concerned them. I told him the only information that concerned them was that they had 72 hours to get out before I called the police. Nicole laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. She said she was not going anywhere, that this house was as much hers as mine, and if anyone was leaving it would be me. I told her she was completely delusional, that the house had my name on the deed, that I had paid every single cent for it, that I had worked like an animal for 20 years to buy it. Nicole shrugged as if none of that mattered. She said possession is 9/10 of the law, that they were living here, their belongings were here, that they had made improvements with the furniture and decorations they bought, that any judge would see they had just as much right as I did. I told her she was wrong, that I had consulted a real lawyer and she did not have even the smallest chance. Then Nicole did something I will never forget. She moved very close until our faces were inches apart. I could smell her perfume and see pure hatred burning in her eyes. She told me in a low, threatening voice that I was a foolish old woman if I thought I could win against them. That they were young and strong while I was just an elderly woman alone. That accidents happen all the time to people my age. Falls downstairs, slipping in the shower, sudden heart problems. That it would be such a shame if something happened to me. Terror shot through my entire body. This was not just an argument. Nicole was directly threatening my life. She was implying they might hurt me or even kill me to get my house. I looked desperately at Marcus, searching for any sign he would defend me, that he would tell his wife she had gone too far. But Marcus just stared at the floor with clenched fists, saying nothing. My son was allowing his wife to threaten my life and he said absolutely nothing. I backed toward the door, clutching the metal box to my chest. I told them in a shaking voice that they would regret this, that I was calling the police immediately. Nicole laughed and said, "Go ahead, call them. Tell the police your daughter-in-law said some mean words. See if they come for that. I would just sound like a paranoid, senile old woman." I ran from my room, locked the door, and sat on the floor with my back against it, trying to catch my breath. I pulled out my phone and called Susan. When she answered, I told her everything between sobs. The threats, the forced box, the fear I felt in my own home. Susan begged me to pack a bag and stay with her, that it was not safe for me there. But something inside me rebelled. If I left even for one night, I would be abandoning my house to them. I would be giving them exactly what they wanted.
Well,
I was not going to run from what belonged to me. I told Susan I would be fine, that I was not letting them push me out. She made me promise to call if anything happened. I did not sleep at all that night. I sat up in bed with the lights on, listening to every sound in the house. I heard Marcus and Nicole walking in the hallway, their voices arguing about something I could not make out. Every time their footsteps approached my door, my heart raced. I kept my phone in my hand, ready to dial emergency services if they tried anything. But nothing happened that night. Morning came and I left my room exhausted. Marcus had already gone to work. Nicole was in the kitchen making breakfast as if nothing had happened. She glanced at me when I entered but said nothing. I did not speak either. The silence between us was thick with mutual hatred. I made coffee with still trembling hands. Every move Nicole made put me on high alert. When she walked near the knife block, I stepped back. When she moved behind me, I turned to keep her in my line of sight. This was unbearable. I could not keep living in constant fear in my own home, looking over my shoulder, wondering if every meal might be poisoned. I made my final decision. I called the lawyer and asked him to prepare eviction papers immediately. He said they would be ready in 2 hours. Then I called the police station and explained I needed an officer present to keep the peace when I served eviction papers to my son and daughter-in-law. They said they would send someone at 3 that afternoon. The hours crawled by. Nicole left around noon. I used that time to take my most precious belongings to Susan's house for safekeeping. Family photographs, my mother's jewelry, important documents. I was not going to risk them destroying my memories out of spite. At 2 o'clock, I picked up the eviction papers from the lawyer's office. Official documents giving them 15 days to vacate the property. The lawyer explained that although standard eviction was shorter, since they had lived there over a year, they were legally entitled to 2 weeks' notice. 15 more days of tension and fear. But at least the law was on my side. I arrived home just as Marcus was getting there from work. Nicole was already inside. We were all in the living room when there was a knock at the door. It was 2 police officers. Marcus went pale. Nicole jumped up demanding to know what was happening. I opened the door and let the officers in. One was a woman around 40 with a calm professional manner. The other was an older man who surveyed the scene with experienced eyes. I explained the situation clearly and calmly. That Marcus was my son, that he and his wife had been temporary guests in my home, that the arrangement was ending, and I was formally asking them to leave. I showed the officers the deed proving I was the sole owner. They reviewed it and nodded. Then I handed Marcus the eviction papers. His hands trembled as he read them, his face going white. Nicole grabbed the papers from him and scanned them, her expression growing more furious with each line. When she finished, she looked at me with absolute hatred. The female officer explained in a professional voice that the papers were legally valid and binding, that they had 15 days to vacate or face serious legal consequences. Nicole screamed that this was outrageous, that I could not throw them onto the street like garbage, that what kind of mother does this to her own son? The officer replied firmly that Mrs. Torres was the sole legal owner and had every right to ask them to leave. That if they had questions they could consult their own attorney, but the papers were in order and must be obeyed. Marcus finally spoke. His voice sounded broken and small, nothing like the man who had tried to intimidate me. He asked how I could do this to them, how I could throw my own son out onto the street. I looked him directly in the eyes and told him that he made this choice when he allowed his wife to threaten my safety, when he tried to steal my house, when he broke into my room to go through my things like I was a stranger, that he chose Nicole over me and now he had to live with that choice. The officers stayed several more minutes to ensure things remained calm. Before leaving, the female officer gave me her card and told me if I ever felt I was in danger I should not hesitate to call, that they would return in 15 days to make sure the eviction was completed properly. After they left, the silence was crushing. Marcus stood holding the papers, staring at them like he could not believe they were real. Nicole broke the silence with a scream of pure rage that echoed through the house. She said I would regret this, that I had no idea who I was messing with, that she was not just going to leave quietly, that if I wanted war I was going to get it. I replied with a calmness I did not know I possessed that the papers spoke for themselves. They had 15 days exactly and not one more. After that, if they were still here, I would return with police and they would be forcibly removed. Marcus dropped the papers on the floor and walked toward me. For a moment I thought he might yell at me, but what he did was worse. He looked at me with tears filling his eyes and asked when did I become so cruel. He said he thought I loved him, that he always believed nothing was more important to a mother than her child. How could I value a house made of bricks more than my own blood? I felt something crack inside my chest. I told him I had loved him more than anything in this entire world. That I worked until my body broke down to give him everything he needed. That I stayed up sewing until dawn so he could have proper shoes and food and education. That I bought this house thinking someday he would inherit something valuable, something representing all my sacrifices. But he had destroyed that love when he believed his wife's lies about me. When he treated me like a burden in my own home. When he let her threaten me and did nothing to protect me. I told him the Marcus I raised, the sweet boy who used to hug me and call me the best mom in the world, that Marcus was gone. The man standing before me was a stranger controlled by a manipulative woman who only wanted my property. That if he ever woke up and realized what he had done, it would be too late because I could not keep being destroyed by people who were supposed to love me. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but Nicole grabbed his arm. She told him not to waste his breath on me, that I had shown my true nature, that I could rot in hell with my house and my loneliness. She dragged Marcus toward their bedroom and slammed the door so violently the entire house seemed to shake. I stood alone in the middle of the living room, trembling from head to toe. I had won the legal battle, but the emotional cost was devastating. This was my son, my only child, and I had just ordered him out of my house. I collapsed onto the sofa and cried silently, hugging myself, feeling an emptiness in my chest I had never experienced before. The next 15 days were absolute hell. Marcus and Nicole stopped speaking to me entirely. When I entered a room, they immediately left. They ate all their meals locked in the bedroom, leaving dirty dishes piled in the sink for me to clean. They packed their belongings with deliberate slowness, as if trying to torture me by prolonging their presence as much as possible. One night I heard them arguing through the walls. Marcus sounded desperate, pleading. He was telling Nicole maybe they should try talking to me, apologizing, finding some kind of compromise. Nicole yelled at him not to be so weak, that I was the one who should apologize, that if he lowered himself to beg his mother she would leave him. Marcus went silent after that. On the 5th day I came home from buying groceries and immediately sensed something was wrong. It took me a moment to realize what had changed. Several pictures were missing from the walls. Artwork I had purchased with my hard-earned money that had decorated my home for years. I ran to my bedroom and discovered more of my things were gone. An antique music box that had belonged to my grandmother. A beautiful lamp that had cost me months of savings. Even some of my best quality linens had vanished. I stormed to their bedroom door and pounded on it hard. Nicole opened it with an innocent expression that made me want to scream. I demanded to know where my belongings were. She shrugged and said she had no idea what I was talking about. That if things were missing, maybe I had misplaced them. That at my age it was perfectly normal to start forgetting where you leave things. I told her I knew she had taken them and to return everything immediately or I would call the police. Nicole smiled that same cold, cruel smile. She said, "Go ahead, call the police. Tell them your daughter-in-law took some items from the house where she lives. See if they believe an old woman with memory problems or a young credible woman. Besides, who could prove those things were mine and not theirs? I did not have receipts for antiques purchased decades ago. There were no photographs with dates proving they were mine before Nicole arrived. She was right and we both knew it. I could not prove ownership of those items. It was my word against hers and she knew she had the advantage. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I told her she could keep those things if she was that desperate for them, that they were just objects after all. But on day 15 I would be standing here with police officers and she had better be completely gone or she would face criminal charges. Nicole narrowed her eyes and for a moment I genuinely thought she might strike me. But Marcus appeared behind her and put his hand on her shoulder. He said something to her in a low voice I could not hear. Nicole gave me one final look of pure hatred and slammed the door in my face. I returned to my room feeling like my entire body ached. Not physical pain but something much deeper. Pain in my very soul. I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling thinking about all the years I had worked to build a life. How it had all collapsed in just 15 months. How I had lost my son in the process. But I also thought about how I had refused to let them defeat me completely. That I had fought for what was mine. That I had not stayed silent while they trampled over me. I had discovered strength inside myself I never knew existed. A strength born from decades of struggle and survival, of getting up every single time life knocked me down. The following days passed in unbearable tension. Marcus and Nicole packed boxes and moved them to a rental truck. I stayed in my room most of the time, only venturing out when I knew they were gone. Susan visited me every single day to make sure I was safe and okay. She brought me meals because I had no appetite. She held me while I cried and reminded me I was doing the right thing. Finally the 15th day arrived. I woke up that morning with a heavy knot in my stomach. This was the final day. At 3 in the afternoon the police would arrive to supervise and confirm that Marcus and Nicole had completely vacated my property. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a simple but dignified outfit. I wanted to appear strong, not like the victim they had tried to make me feel like for so long. I pulled my hair back neatly, applied a little makeup, and looked at myself in the mirror. I saw a woman who had survived far worse than this. I left my bedroom and found the house in complete chaos. Boxes everywhere, garbage bags stuffed with clothes, furniture shoved out of place. Marcus was carrying things back and forth to a moving truck parked outside. Nicole was in the living room packing final items with sharp, angry movements. When she saw me, she shot me a look of pure venom but said nothing. I made coffee in the kitchen, trying to ignore the disaster around me. My hands trembled slightly as I held the cup. Just a few more hours and this nightmare would finally be over. A few more hours until I got my house, my peace, my life back. But also a few more hours confirming that I had permanently lost my son. The price of my freedom was my relationship with Marcus. Even though I knew I had done the right thing, the pain was almost unbearable. By 2 in the afternoon, most of their belongings were loaded into the truck. Marcus kept going in and out, sweating heavily, his shirt soaked through. Every time he passed me, he looked away. He could not meet my eyes because somewhere deep down he knew what he had done was unforgivable. Part of me wanted to grab him and shake him and make him see the truth. But the other part, the exhausted, wounded part, just wanted this to end. Just wanted them gone so I could begin healing. Nicole emerged from the bedroom carrying the last box. She dropped it on the floor with a loud thud and stood directly in front of me with her arms crossed. She told me she hoped I was happy now, that I had gotten exactly what I wanted, that now I could rot alone in this ugly old house, that when I got sick and was dying there would be nobody to take care of me, that I would die alone like the bitter old woman I truly was. I replied that I would rather die alone and at peace than live surrounded by people who hated me and wanted to destroy me. That she could think whatever she wanted about me. But at the end of the day, this house was mine and I had won. Nicole clenched her fists and took a threatening step toward me. For a moment I actually thought she might physically attack me. And honestly, at that point I did not even care anymore. But Marcus appeared right then and grabbed her arm firmly, telling her that was enough, that they needed to just leave now. Then Nicole did something I will remember for the rest of my life. She turned toward the living room and with one swift, violent motion grabbed a vase from the shelf. It was an antique ceramic vase that had belonged to my mother, one of the very few things of deep sentimental value I had left from my family. Before I could react or say anything, Nicole hurled it to the floor with all her strength. The vase exploded into countless pieces, shards of painted ceramic flying in every direction. The sound was like a gunshot in the tense silence. I stood completely frozen, staring at the fragments of my mother's vase scattered across the floor. That vase had survived for generations. It had been passed down through my family with love and care. It was one of my last tangible connections to my mother who had died years ago. And now it was destroyed, shattered into 1,000 pieces out of pure malicious spite. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I would not give Nicole the satisfaction of seeing me cry. Marcus stared at the broken pieces with a shocked, horrified expression on his face. Even he seemed appalled by what his wife had just done. He said to her, "What is wrong with you? You have gone completely insane." Nicole shrugged with complete indifference and said it was just an ugly old vase. Now you have one less piece of junk cluttering up the place. She walked toward the front door, deliberately stepping on the fragments, crushing them further under her shoes, making them crunch with each step. In that moment something inside me broke as well. Not just sadness or pain. Pure rage. Rage for all the months of humiliation and abuse. For the threats and manipulation. For watching my son transformed into someone I did not recognize. Rage for that broken vase representing everything I had lost. I walked to the door where Nicole was standing and told her in a voice so cold and hard it surprised even me to get out of my house immediately before I called the police for destruction of property and assault. Nicole laughed, but it was a hollow laugh without any real humor. She said, "Yeah, we are leaving. This dump stinks of old lady and failure anyway. Marcus deserves so much better than a selfish mother who chooses walls over her own flesh and blood." She walked out to the truck. Marcus stood in the doorway looking at me with an expression I could not quite read. There was pain in his eyes, but also something else. Regret, maybe. Confusion. He took one step toward me and opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something important. I waited with my heart pounding, wondering if he was finally going to apologize, if he was finally going to acknowledge all the terrible damage they had caused. But then Nicole screamed his name from the truck, telling him to hurry up, they needed to leave. Marcus closed his mouth, gave me one last long look, and walked out the door without saying a single word. I stood in the doorway watching him climb into the truck. Watching my son, the baby I had cradled in my arms, the boy I had sacrificed everything for, drive away from me possibly forever. The truck started and began pulling away down the street. I watched until it completely disappeared from view, until the only thing left was dust floating in the afternoon air. At exactly 3 o'clock the police car pulled up. The same 2 officers from before stepped out and walked up to my door. I informed them that Marcus and Nicole had already left, that they had vacated before the deadline. The female officer asked permission to walk through the property to verify they had indeed removed all their belongings and were truly gone. I nodded and let them inside. We walked through the house together room by room. The guest bedroom where they had stayed was empty except for the furniture that had always been mine. The bathroom was clear of all their products and items. The living room was messy and damaged but free of their possessions. The officers took detailed notes and told me everything was in proper order, that the eviction had been successfully completed. They gave me an official signed document certifying that the property had been fully vacated. They told me if I had any further problems or if Marcus and Nicole tried to return, I should call them immediately. When the officers finally left, I closed the front door and locked it securely. The silence that filled the house was absolutely complete. For the first time in 15 long months, I was totally and completely alone in my own home. I leaned my back against the door and finally allowed the tears to fall freely. I cried for everything I had lost. For my son who was no longer really my son. For all the years I had dedicated to raising him only to have it end like this. For that precious vase lying broken on the floor that could never be repaired or replaced. But I also cried with profound relief. 'Cause it was finally over. 'Cause I had survived. 'Cause my house was mine again. I slid down to the floor with my back still against the door, hugging my knees tightly, letting the tears wash away all the poison and pain that had been building for months. I cried until there were absolutely no tears left, until all that remained was a bone-deep exhaustion. When I finally managed to pull myself up, I walked slowly through the house looking at every single corner. There was so much to clean, so much to repair. The walls had marks and holes where they had hung their things. The floors were scratched and stained from moving furniture. The kitchen was filthy. The bathroom desperately needed deep cleaning. But all of that could be fixed. All of that was just surface damage. What mattered was that the house was mine again. I went to my bedroom and pulled the metal box out from under my bed. I opened it carefully and counted the money inside. I still had my savings completely intact thanks to changing my bank account in time. I had enough to live with dignity, to make all the repairs the house needed, to move forward with my life. I took the deed in my hands and held it tight against my chest over my heart. This house was mine. Nobody had managed to take it from me. I had fought the battle and I had won. Susan arrived an hour later exactly as we had planned. She brought home cooked food and a bottle of wine. She hugged me so tight I could barely breathe and told me she was incredibly proud of me, that I had done the right thing even though it was the hardest thing imaginable. We ate dinner together in my kitchen, talking quietly, planning how I would rebuild my life now that I was finally free. That night I slept in my own bed without jumping at every single sound for the first time in many months. I slept deeply and peacefully knowing I was safe in my own home. The first few days after they left felt strange and disorienting. The house seemed too large and too quiet at the same time. I would wake up in the mornings and for a brief moment forget they were gone. Then I would remember and feel an odd mixture of relief and deep sadness. I had won back my house but I had lost my son in the process. That thought haunted me during the quiet nights when everything was dark and still. But I made a firm decision not to remain paralyzed by pain and regret. I started cleaning the house thoroughly from top to bottom. I scrubbed every surface, washed every corner, removed every trace of Nicole's presence. I hired a painter to redo all the walls, choosing a warm cream color that made everything feel brighter and more hopeful. I bought new curtains, simple white ones just like the ones I had always loved. Slowly, piece by piece, my house began to feel like mine again. I called my old clients one by one. I explained that I had been dealing with difficult family problems but was now completely available to take on work again. Some had already found other seamstresses, but several told me they were genuinely happy I was back, that they had missed my quality work and attention to detail. The orders started coming in again. Wedding dresses, alterations, special embroidery projects. My sewing machine started humming by the window again, and the familiar sound filled me with deep peace. One afternoon about 3 weeks after the eviction, my doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a young woman I had never seen before. She was holding a lavender dress in a plastic garment bag and asked if I was Mrs. Torres who did alterations. I told her I was. She explained that her sister was getting married in 2 weeks and desperately needed her bridesmaid dress adjusted urgently. I invited her inside and took her measurements carefully. As I worked, she told me enthusiastically about the upcoming wedding, about how excited and happy her sister was. There was such joy and hope in her voice. It reminded me that life continues moving forward, that there were still good and beautiful things in the world worth experiencing. Susan came to visit me almost every single day. We would have coffee in the kitchen and talk about everything and nothing. She never brought up Marcus unless I mentioned him first. She was wonderfully considerate that way, always knowing when to push me to talk and when to just let things be. She helped me shop for new furniture to replace items that had been damaged or taken. We went to estate sales together and found a gorgeous dark wood table. We brought it home laughing like young girls as we struggled to maneuver it up the front steps. About a month after the eviction, I adopted a cat. It was a scruffy orange stray that appeared in my backyard one chilly morning looking thin and frightened. I gave him milk and canned tuna and he decided to stay. I named him Lucky because I felt like we had both gotten a second chance at peace. Lucky became my constant faithful companion. He slept at the foot of my bed, sat beside me while I sewed for hours, followed me around the house. His warm presence filled the silence in a way that truly comforted my heart. The weeks steadily turned into months. Summer faded into autumn. The trees lining my street turned brilliant shades of orange and gold, leaves falling gently onto the front lawn. I kept working and sewing and rebuilding my life carefully piece by piece. The pain over Marcus was still there like a wound that had not fully healed. But I learned to live with it. I learned that a mother's love does not simply disappear just because your child disappoints and betrays you. But I also learned that loving someone does not mean you have to let them destroy you. One quiet afternoon in late November, 4 full months after they had left, I was watering the plants in my front yard when I saw a familiar figure walking slowly down the street. It was Marcus. He was alone, hands shoved deep in his pockets, walking hesitantly as if he were trying to gather courage for something difficult. He stopped directly in front of my house and just stood there on the sidewalk staring at the front door. I remained completely motionless with the garden hose still in my hand, not knowing what to do or say. Finally Marcus walked slowly up the driveway toward me. He saw me standing there in the yard and stopped abruptly. We looked at each other in complete silence for what felt like an eternity. I noticed immediately that he looked very different. Much thinner with deep dark circles under his eyes. His clothes wrinkled and worn. He looked like someone who had been through extremely hard times. He opened his mouth to speak but no words came out at first. I saw his eyes begin to fill with tears. I asked him quietly where Nicole was. Marcus looked down at the ground and told me she had left him. That just 2 weeks after they moved out she had met another man, someone with much more money and better prospects for the future. That one morning he woke up and she was simply gone, having taken half their belongings and left only a brief note saying she did not want to be with him anymore, that she deserved better. He said he had been living in a tiny run-down apartment, barely able to afford the rent each month, eating just enough to survive. He told me he was deeply sorry, that he had been a blind, complete idiot, that Nicole had manipulated him from the very beginning, making him believe I was the problem when it was really her all along. That he realized far too late that he had betrayed and lost the only person who had ever truly loved him unconditionally. He said he did not expect me to forgive him, that he knew what he had done was unforgivable, but he desperately needed me to know how profoundly he regretted everything. The tears were now streaming freely down his face. There stood my son, my Marcus, completely broken and genuinely repentant. Part of me wanted to run to him and hug him tightly and tell him everything would be okay, that he could come home. That deeply ingrained maternal instinct that had guided my entire adult life screamed at me to forgive him immediately without question. But there was another part of me, the part that had learned through terrible pain to value myself, that understood some wounds do not heal with simple apologies. I told him gently but firmly that I appreciated his words, that I could see he was truly sorry, but that I could not just forget everything that had happened. That he had threatened me, that he had allowed his wife to terrorize me in my own home, that he had tried to steal what I had worked my entire life to build. That those things leave deep scars that do not simply disappear overnight no matter how much we might want them to. Marcus nodded while sobbing openly. He said he completely understood, that he did not deserve my forgiveness, that he just wanted me to know he was genuinely sorry. He said that if one day, even if it takes many years, I could find any small space in my heart for him, to please consider giving him another chance. He turned to walk away. His shoulders slumped in complete defeat. I called out his name before he reached the street. He stopped immediately and turned to look at me with desperate, hopeful eyes. I told him that forgiveness would take a very long time, that trust had been shattered completely and rebuilding it would be an extremely difficult process. But if he was truly genuinely sorry, if he really wanted to repair our relationship, we could perhaps start very slowly. Maybe with coffee once a month. Maybe with honest conversations with absolutely no lies or manipulations. Maybe with a great deal of time and consistent effort, we could eventually find our way back to each other in some new form. Marcus looked at me with eyes suddenly full of fragile hope and nodded his head vigorously. He said he would do absolutely whatever it takes, that he would wait as long as I needed, that he would work every single day to prove he had truly changed, that he had learned his painful lesson. We said goodbye with an awkward, clumsy handshake. It was not a hug, not yet. But there was something there between us. A tiny seed of possibility beginning to take root. That night I sat in my beautifully renovated living room with Lucky curled up warm beside me, and thought deeply about everything that had happened over these past months. I had lost so much that was precious to me, but I had also gained something absolutely invaluable. I had found myself. I had discovered I was far stronger than I ever imagined possible, that I could stand up and defend what was mine, that my love for my son did not mean I had to sacrifice my dignity and my peace of mind. The house was silent, but it was no longer an empty, lonely silence. It was a peaceful, contented silence full of new possibilities. The freshly painted walls glowed softly in the warm lamplight. The white curtains moved gently with a cool breeze coming through the slightly open window. My beloved sewing machine sat ready by the window waiting for tomorrow's projects. I looked around my living room and felt something I had not felt in such a very long time. Gratitude. Deep, profound gratitude for this house that I had fought so incredibly hard to obtain and then to keep. Gratitude for true friends like Susan who had supported me through the darkest moments. Gratitude for the inner strength I had discovered when I needed it most desperately. And yes, even a small amount of gratitude for everything painful that had happened because it had taught me lessons I would carry with me forever. I did not know if Marcus and I would ever have the same close relationship we once had. Probably not. Too much had happened. Too much had been broken and destroyed. But maybe we could build something entirely new together. Something different but genuine and real. Something based on mutual respect and very clear boundaries, not just on family obligation and guilt. I stood up from the sofa and walked to the window. Outside the street was peaceful and quiet under the soft glow of streetlights. It was my street in front of my house in my neighborhood. All of this belonged to me, earned through sweat and tears and decades of absolutely tireless work. Nobody had simply handed it to me as a gift. Nobody had managed to take it away from me. I had fought for it with everything I had and I had won. I closed the curtains gently, turned off all the lights and went to my bedroom. Lucky followed me faithfully, jumping onto the bed and settling into his usual comfortable spot at the foot. I lay down between clean sheets that smelled like fresh lavender, in my bed, in my room, in my house. For the first time in well over a year, I fell asleep feeling completely and utterly safe and at peace. Because in the end I had learned the most important and valuable lesson of all. That valuing yourself is not selfishness. It is essential survival. That setting firm boundaries is not cruelty. It is absolute necessity. And that sometimes to save what truly matters most, you have to be willing to let go of what is destroying you. Now it was just me, my house, my cat Lucky, and the healing peaceful silence I had so desperately needed and fought for. And for the first time in a very long time that was more than enough. That was everything.